Hello everyone. Since we don't have much content planned for the YouTube side of things, I figured we'd do something a bit different today and talk about each tier and end up doing a review from the last race and doing a preview for the next race. So let's get into it. Let's start with tier 3 and let's talk about the most recent race in Austria. There were 11 incidents submitted to the stewards, and our tier coordinator, Egg, has been very vocal on the driving standards. From the commentary standpoint, it seemed a lot better from the first 2 rounds with the driving standards. But with 11 incidents being submitted, it still needs improvement. You had all the top 3 finishing drivers in that Austria race get into an incident at some point during the event. Uri won his second race, Turbo finished second, and Ardell finished third. But with those 3 drivers, 2 of the 3, I believe, if not 2, at least one of them, definitely Uri, went to see the stewards room afterwards. And we don't know the full results yet, at least I don't from our side of things. But no matter what, with Uri and Turbo, this is super big for the championship. With Lennon gone from the tier now, there's definitely some questions raised of who will be the contender, who will be the favorite at the front of the field. And it seems like Uri has risen to the occasion. He has had pole positions. He has now had race wins, now in a full distance race as well, not just a race shortened event. And for Turbo seems to be right there with Uri. But I want to kind of talk through the rest of the field for a little bit as well while we're at it. Before we get to that, I just want to mention Uri does take the championship lead regardless of what happens here, I believe. Even if he doesn't, he's only behind by a few points if for some reason he does get penalized for the incident that he had with Invade and whatever else may have got submitted. But with Uri and Turbo, they seem to be emerging as the favorites in the championship. I said let's talk about the rest. Well, let's do that now. Ardell finished third, and just like Qatar, when Uri won, we get to say now he's done it in a full distance event. However, when you look at the big picture, Ardell should have been more up there. Ardell should have been in winning contention, and he wasn't at the end of the day. He got track limit penalties, and he did not end up capitalizing on what should have been. For Ardell's case, we have to look at the fact that he had a few half spins, he pitted a little too late, and he threw it away a little bit. His defending was quite crazy, but you know, he's going for his first win. I won't criticize that too heavily. I don't blame him. He got aggressive, but it was, I would say, 95% fair. For Ardell's case, though, he's now at Red Bull, and if he wants to emerge as a title contender with Uri and Turbo, he's got to limit these mistakes. I feel like we saw a little bit of a different Ardell for sure, in the sense of, I guess, not finishing far behind like before when he has had races that should be top 3, top 4, top 5. He had a race that should have been top 2 and it ended up being P3. So he definitely has to improve in that aspect. And someone else who I'm definitely impressed with from that same academy is Alex Norris. Alex Norris getting another good finish, tying his best finish in P4. Goatley had a much better race. It wasn't filled with many incidents. He had an incident that got submitted to the stewards, and as mentioned on stream, he was penalized in 3 of the first 3 races. It may end up being 4 of the first 4 races if he is not careful enough with whatever happened there. He was one of the drivers submitted in the 11 incidents that got submitted, so he's definitely got to be careful, Goatley does, but he has a lot to hold his he has a lot to hold his head high upon. And that's because he started P6 in a V-carb ahead of his teammate, but finished behind his teammate. And if he didn't fall back, he could have had a better result. He had a lot of great pace. As for Invade, he had a lot of track limit penalties, and it didn't end up going his way in the end. The thing for him is he got DRS off of Academy teammates, and there's a lot of controversy going on right there between both Haas drivers of SV and Valkyrie. We're talking about potential race fixing right there, and I was not aware of this, but as pointed out by some of the admins, Valkyrie slowing down, causing yellow flags to end up giving the teammate DRS, and SV spinning out multiple times and then end up doing so, I think is the bigger story. And there's been a lot of discussion amongst the Tier 3 drivers is what Valkyrie did wrong. There's no question everyone feels like what SV did was wrong. SV probably had an uncontrollable car. Rear wing was, probably broken with the way it seemed. That's totally fine. If you have rear wing damage, you can pit and retire the car. Just show proof of your rear wing damage and the admin team won't have an issue with it. But to keep spinning out and then give your teammate DRS, it seems like there's a bit more to it, and that's a bit wrong. Especially with SV's penalties he had from track limits, 37 seconds, and then being disqualified from the game. It does seem a bit much what he was doing, but we know SV is a fast driver. He qualified well, I'm almost certain, but he's just got to get rid of these mistakes and not have stupid things happen. And for Valkyrie's case, she was not having the best of races either. She, I believe, got into an incident at the start and was battling Leon at the back of the field. She had clean battles, and she backed off. I don't think what she did is as wrong, and as Invade said, it didn't really help him as much, but I'm more curious to say what the stores are going to say on Valkyrie, since I'm sure SV will be penalized, and rightfully so. I don't know how much he will be penalized for it, but Valkyrie's case is a bit interesting. It's going to definitely determine a future precedent, especially for even Tier 1 drivers, Tier 2 drivers. We know how powerful Slipstream and ERS and DRS is on this game, so I'm interested to see where that goes, but those two did not have a great race. Invade didn't really have a great race when you look at where he finished on track. He finished P3, was leading for a bit, and had 12 seconds of penalties. He's just got to minimize those penalties, and he will be fine. For Invade's case, finishing P5 is actually a great sight considering how the recent races have been. You only had a P5 in Australia, and I'm a little disappointed with how the season has started, especially with George being gone from the tier. You'd think he would step up, and he hasn't really done so yet. But hopefully this result is a step in the right direction, and hopefully it is for the man who finished behind him, El Mythic. El Mythic, he was very quiet during that race, started P10 for McLaren, and was far behind his teammate, but ended up having much better race pace, was better on the track limits, finished P6 over Optical. Optical definitely needed some good points too. There's a lot of guys who finished in the points who needed some good races and needed some good results, including Woda for Sauber. Woda was known as someone who was causing some issues, I would say, in Tier 2, especially the race in Baku where he hit both McLarens. And for him to be able to get in the points and recover the way he did, there has to be a lot of credit given to him. For Woda's case, P10 in a Sauber does not happen often, especially in Tier 3 in a race that has no safety cars, one VSC. To do that on merit, there's a lot of credit that needs to go his way. And the same for Mythic, though. P5, after qualifying P10, I get it, Austria is filled with DRS trains, but there was not too much that would have happened that would have allowed Mythic to end up finishing P5, P6 from P10. He was behind P5 Man Invade, so a lot of credit is deserved there, and hopefully a lot of those guys do end up turning their seasons around. Two last drivers actually I want to talk about from that event before we get to the preview of Spa is Drift King and Polish Hammer. Two drivers who did not qualify well, and two drivers who have not qualified well at all this season. I spoke about Invade with Ferrari, and I'm going to speak about Polish with Ferrari now. He started off the season well, becoming the first American in Tier 3 to pick up a podium, but I'm a little concerned with this now for Polish. I know he'll probably keep the Ferrari seat, and he already has for next season, but I'm a little concerned with this because Ferrari are not really sitting in a great spot constructors-wise, and they've had not really the best of starts either in the season. If Polish is able to qualify better, he's able to finish better. I know he got into an incident at the start. I spoke to him after that race, but these bad qualifyings definitely don't set you up well. He's not started better than P8 this season in Ferrari, and we saw a few good races from Polish last season in the Ferrari. Pace-wise, may have not gone result-wise, but he was up there. He qualified up there. Now, he's not even qualifying up there, so there is a reason for concern. Another driver I want to talk about is Drift King, and I do hope Polish can end up turning that around. But Drift King, I really want to see him turn this around. Back of the field in Singapore to a podium. Qatar last week, before Austria, he was criticized heavily by some for the speed he had, and it really shows the saying, you're only as good as your last race, because he was criticized heavily from some guys at other academies, I'll say behind the scenes and behind closed doors about his performance in Qatar, but there's other guys who got really messed up with that whole race ending early thing and everything else. So for Drift King, he was one of those that was affected, and he qualified back there. He's another one that needs to figure out the bad qualifying, because he qualified outside of the top 10, and I believe it was the Mercedes he ran that race, because previously he was in the Aston. That race, Drift King was in the Mercedes, qualifying P11, finishing only P8, and that's not bad, but for a driver of his caliber, who was originally going to Red Bull next season, now that's changed. There's been a change there. I do expect a little better, but also I don't expect the criticism as much as it has been for someone like him. For Drift King, he's a very talented driver. He put the fight to George a few times last season and came up second best. So for Drift King, I'm sure things will turn around a lot quicker for him than Polish and Invade and others who need it, but hopefully it all does change around for them, because those guys really do need it. Drift King at least has a podium to his name this season, kind of like Polish does, but the bad qualifyings do need to change around. I was a bit surprised to hear some criticism about Drift King of how is he in the Red Bull after Qatar, but some drivers do not look at the full picture and start wondering those questions and only look at your last race. And well, if we're looking at guys like Invade and Polish and Drift King in their last race, well, it was not the prettiest and not what I would expect out of their potential. For a race like Spa now coming up, which is the next Grand Prix, we're about to get to halfway, guys like them do need to emerge at the front of the field if they want to have a chance for the title. Obviously, being in the points like Invade and Drift King, where you do kind of help yourself with those bad days if you start to have better days, but really the favorites for Spa we look at are people like Uri, Turbo, Ardell, and I'll add in there as well, I mean, anyone who's in that McLaren, and even the Ferraris should do well around Spa. Tier 1 recently ran at Spa, and Gecko finished on the podium. So there should be no reason that we end up seeing a Ferrari at least in the top 5 and at least qualifying better. Even if it's just Invade, even if Polish is up there in the top 8, that's better than what it was in Austria, and he does need that if he wants to avoid the trouble. For someone like Drift King as well, now going to be back at the Merc Academy, I believe, for next season. After things were settled, I think he's got a lot of trust with the team principal of Josh and whoever the team principal may be next season. There's a lot of trust on that side for Drift King, and I think that's great. But this is where things do need to turn around for him in order for him to win his first race. We're looking at some drivers who've not won an RPL after getting a first-time winner just a few weeks ago with Uri. Now we're looking at people like Drift King who could possibly win in a Mercedes. I think it's very doable if Uri or Turbo has trouble. And even Ardell is very vulnerable, as we've seen in Austria just last week. I think Polish Hammer is someone, if the Ferrari can handle well around Spa for Gecko, maybe it can for Polish or Invade, and maybe they can pull off an upset. It's going to be very interesting to see at Spa what does end up happening. I'm not going to give any predictions for a podium, but I will say this. There is a big thing around Spa with Slipstream, DRS, and just staying alive as well on track limits and keeping your car in the circuit. So we'll have to watch out for how drivers do that. Throughout the qualifying session, here's what you're going to expect. You're going to not expect the close gap you saw inside the top 4 at Austria. You're going to expect the top 4 maybe being separated by 4, 5, 3/10, because a mistake around Spa can be made up around the rest of the circuit. So mistakes will be more punishable, and the wing difference from the drivers will be very interesting with the factor of DRS, ERS, Slipstream, you name it. So Uri and Turbo should go as the contenders and should be at the front of the field with no question about it. And Ardell should be there to back up his teammate Uri for the sake of the constructors. And McLaren do need some assist right there for sure. I don't remember who their second driver is, but regardless, Turbo is contending for the Drivers' Championship now and finished right behind Uri. It'll be interesting to see what happens when the steward report comes out. But there's one thing I want to talk about that was mentioned after last week's race in Austria that is a very interesting debate that we could have right now to end off the stream and the video being posted to the YouTube later on. Should Lennon have been banned from Tier 3 and promoted to Tier 2? Well, it's an interesting question because Lennon doesn't feel like he should have. Uri is getting a contract in Tier 2 next season. Lennon's gone to Tier 2, and Uri was finishing right there behind Lennon from the way those two had talked about things and had felt about things. So Lennon feels like it was maybe a little wrongful, but Also, at the same time, when Lennon and Uri both do get promoted to Tier 2 for next season, well, Lennon already is there, Uri is not. It's going to be very interesting to see how things do end up being. But Lennon being taken out of the tier mid-season after having a first, and a second is definitely a good thing that they did end up doing that now instead of holding on. Maybe like last season where some felt George was not supposed to be in Tier 3. George ended up claiming the championship, as we all know now, but some felt George should have not been in Tier 3. Lennon, their decision they made with him was made a lot quicker, and I think a lot of people who may be upset with that have to look at the grand scheme of things and understand that Lennon is a previous Tier 2 driver, previous Tier 2 winner, previous Tier 2 pole sitter, I believe, as well. Lennon's had success there. It was only going to be a matter of time until he was back in the tier that he once was in. But Lennon's got a lot of pace, and we'll see if that was being used or not in the upcoming races that we see for him in Tier 2 and also the other drivers in Tier 3 now. So it shall be interesting to see what ends up happening in Spa with the drivers. So gotta watch out for guys like Uri, McLaren Turbo. They will be the contenders at the front, but can anyone disrupt that? Ardell, like I said, he does seem vulnerable, but he's got to stop the mistakes. If he stops the mistakes, he may just beat both them. He does have the pace to do so. For Drift King, he was just short of beating George, and he's in a Merc now, so hopefully for Drift, he can end up getting his first win, and if he doesn't, and if someone else does get their first win, maybe it ends up being Polish. If Ferrari turn their ways around, they can do so. We saw Ferrari have unexpectedly great pace at races last season where we didn't expect them to do so. Bahrain and China being the best examples. We'll have to see this Thursday at Spa, 3 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. UK time. Make sure you tune in for that event. I'm not sure who'll be on commentary for it, but we will definitely keep you all updated with that being said, and we hope you have a good one. Good evening, good night, good day, whatever it is, whenever you're watching. And we hope to see you watching the Tier 2 preview for this upcoming weekend as well, and tuning into the Tier 3 race, with that being said, on Thursday. Goodbye.